welcome to Edison Open House Global Healthcare 2021. In this session, we're going to highlight the work of OpGen, which is a US precision medicine company harnessing the power of bioinformatics and molecular diagnostics to combat infectious disease. And in particular, they're focusing on reducing antimicrobial resistance. So welcome, Oliver Schacht, their CEO.
Thanks, Vivienne. Thanks for having me.
So this is a really, really important area, not just nationally, but globally. And your company is using really innovative techniques to both detect pathogens more quickly and more easily, but also to detect and monitor antimicrobial resistance and to inform and empower antibiotic decision-making. You've got several pillars that allow you to do this. Tell me a bit more about them.
Absolutely. Well, at OpGen, we have a number of platforms ranging from rapid PCR platforms that literally with just minutes of hands-on time, within a few hours, give you the full result from a patient sample on not only the spectrum of pathogens, but also their antimicrobial resistance profile, all the way up to next generation sequencing and bioinformatics-based platforms where rather than looking at 20, 30, maybe 100 bugs and resistance markers, you can look at thousands, if not tens of thousands, and really predict not only antimicrobial resistance, but even predict antibiotic susceptibility, which really then gives clinicians the ability to carefully and rationally select the appropriate antibiotics for an individual patient, really personalizing infectious disease therapy.
You've got a number of subsidiaries doing these particular bits of work. Tell me a bit more about those.
OpGen is the combination of the original OpGen Inc. here in the US with Curators out of Germany and Ares Genetics in Vienna, Austria. So all of that is now under the OpGen group. Curators and Ares Genetics are wholly owned subsidiaries of OpGen, and it's been fully integrated. So from an R&D, manufacturing, corporate finance, marketing, and sales. We've truly transatlantically integrated the organization since our business combination in April of 2020. Given that the historic registrations, for example, with the FDA or the European CE markings are with Curators, we've kept those legal entities around, but we really consider it all OpGen today. So the Univero platform, which is a cartridge-based sample in, answer out platform, that's historically Curators, is now the OpGen Univero platform, and Ares Genetics, and Ares on the one hand, of course, being the Greek god of war, but at the same time, antibiotic resistance or antimicrobial resistance sort of baked into that word is again, part and parcel of the overall OpGen story. And we've actually combined the legacy of our databases on the Ares Genetics side. Historically, this was based on the Siemens strain collection, where Siemens for 30 years had globally collected tens of thousands of bacterial isolates around the world on all 5 continents. OpGen had done something similar with the Merck strain collection, Merck Pharma, and built into the OpGen Acuitas Lighthouse. We've now brought these two databases together, and what we now believe, RSDB being one of the broadest pathogen antimicrobial resistance genotype phenotype databases. But the value added is not the data per se, which we do make accessible, for example, through a collaboration with QIAGEN. They have this as part of their QIAGEN bioinformatics suite, research use only, so that clinical researchers around the globe can access the database. Our value added at OpGen through the RSDB is more one of working with pharmaceutical companies, working with hospitals and labs, as well as working with diagnostics companies in building artificial intelligence powered sort of machine learning algorithms and prediction models that really, when you feed a next generation data set, allows you to quickly and automatically basically make those predictions of whether you're facing really a superbug with multiple drug resistances or whether it's still susceptible.
Now, I'm not having to explain PCR because PCR is something that we've suddenly become aware of through COVID. And how has COVID changed what you're doing? Of course, COVID, a virus, not a bacteria, but we've seen this big push with COVID to go from laboratory-based PCR to near-patient PCR. How is that affecting your business, and how have you been involved in the COVID response?
Now, obviously, being in infectious disease diagnostics, you cannot not be active in the fight against COVID. So, as a company, OpGen globally has, really stepped up to the task as early as February and March of last year. We've started developing our own SARS-CoV-2 PCR test. We have a kit that's CE marked that we are commercializing through our Curators subsidiary, through our European distribution network. We have a partnership in the United States with Menarini Silicon Biosystems, whereby we co-promote and co-market certain COVID-relevant tests, currently an antibody test, in the future potentially also antigen as well as PCR-based tests. But I think the more important theme here is we believe at OpGen that really antimicrobial resistance is sort of the pandemic that is underlying the current COVID-19 pandemic. The science has been around for more than 20 years. The World Health Organization in the year 2000 had published a report called Bad Bugs, No Drugs. They'd done an update, I think about 2-3 years ago. When you read this, the reality is not only has it all become true, it's a lot worse. It's happening faster, it's happening at a global scale. And what if that next pandemic were truly a bacterial superbug? So to us, the theme, while we are active in COVID, we've not changed our business model and strategy to become a COVID diagnostic company. We really keep pushing. And what we've seen, and again, there's a number of interesting clinical studies. There's a recent Lancet paper basically showing that whilst the co-infection of COVID patients in hospitals with bacterial pathogens, typically bacterial pneumonia, is only in the 7 to maybe 14, 15% range. In intensive care units can be as high as 25%, but more than 70%, in some countries 80%, of all patients being hospitalized with COVID-19 were administered antibiotics. Now, what does that mean? We're massively overtreating these patients with broad spectrum antibiotics out of an overabundance of caution and a fear that if they had a bacterial co-infection, that of course we want to be able to treat for that. But the reality is the vast majority of these patients don't. And by treating them with broad spectrum antibiotics, we're compounding and aggravating the problem of ever-growing antimicrobial resistance in these hospitals, in these ICUs, so that if and when the next patient comes around with a true bacterial infection, some of those bugs may simply no longer be susceptible. So really being able to improve antibiotic stewardship by virtue of rapid diagnostic testing, not only for SARS-CoV-2 as a virus, but at the same time, looking at bacterial pathogens and their resistance profile with our pneumonia product, which is one of only 2 FDA-approved, or cleared, I should say, pneumonia panels in the US, and similar in Europe, is one of the very few approved CE-marked pneumonia tests. We believe that combination of rapid viral testing with rapid and comprehensive bacterial and AMR testing is key.
I think people perhaps don't appreciate that what happens now is that, if somebody comes in, they've obviously got some kind of respiratory infection. And what physicians do is they just treat, and because it takes a while normally for the lab to come back and get the result. So actually these rapid tests are really, really critical in selecting the right antibiotic to be used.
Absolutely. And again, we've been involved in a number of clinical studies, and we've seen some of our collaborators and hospital partners initiate clinical trials and publish on them. No matter which study you pick, we've had studies done in the US with Northwestern in Chicago and Beaumont in Michigan. We've had a recent multicentric study with 1,400 plus patients. We've published together with Karolinska in Sweden. The story is always the same. You can, based on a rapid molecular result for pathogen ID on the bacterial side with antimicrobial resistance patterns, and then the numbers vary, but you can probably change antibiotic therapy selection anywhere from 40% all the way up to 80% plus of all patient cases. So it's not a few where you would typically want to change your therapy. It's, a substantial number. And in some studies, more than 2/3 of all patients. And that's really the scale of the challenge. One of the issues, of course, is that while, of course, at a local level or regional level in a specific hospital or laboratory, you can improve antibiotic stewardship at a sort of hospital system level. However, to really address this as society and frankly as mankind, that's a challenge that won't be addressed locally, regionally, nationally, unless we take a truly global approach, and not for a lack of, not for a lack of understanding and science, not for a lack of the WHO or the G7 or G20 getting it. I think there's the question of multilateral political will to really, really address this. And this has a lot to do with an appreciation of rapid testing. It has to do with the appropriate reimbursement systems, so that while you can develop these tests and you can run them very quickly, unless they're being reimbursed at some reasonable levels, that's just no incentive for industry, in which case it should then be part and parcel of the public health framework to be able to kind of make those available. I'm an eternal optimist when it comes to climate change. That really is my equivalent of AMR and antibiotic stewardship is climate change. The science has been around for decades. It'll take the right circumstances and the right environment for everybody to kind of gel and come together and, get some real change happening. We've seen it in the automotive industry over the last very few years, where frankly, 5 or 10 years ago, everybody was said it's impossible. Getting out of coal, getting out of nuclear power, getting into renewables, getting into electric powered cars. I think we need that same really broad societal approach to really fight antimicrobial resistance. There is some time, so we're not talking about truly running out of effective antibiotics this year or next. But if we continue on the current course, whether it's 2040 or 2050, but in the next 20, 30 years, we'll put ourselves in a position where more people are going to die in the Western world, in Europe, in the US, in developed countries from bacterial infections than are dying from cancer and other major diseases combined. And that's really not a position we'd want to be in.
And do you think COVID has shown people how how these diseases are global, that nobody is safe until everybody is safe, and that the global reach really, really matters, because it's so critical in antimicrobial resistance and good stewardship to make this a global effort?
Well, one would certainly hope so. Typically we as humans have a fairly short memory, and some of it is good news. The human brain, evolution-wise, is wired to quickly forget pain and not actually be able to remember pain per se, which is a mechanism of basic survival. But unless we remember this lesson and take them to heart, I think it's going to be just a question of time. It's not a question of if. It's just, is it going to be 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? But we'll see a new pandemic. And unless we kind of implement a lot of these lessons learned and really make that improvement. Now, I think there's still going to be a layered approach. I think it's also unrealistic to assume that modern rapid molecular testing at the point of care in these high-end platforms is going to be globally available in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia. I think that'd be naive, at least in the short term. But again, if we come through with effective vaccinations, and that truly needs to be global, and then at least in the developed and developing countries, make sure that we use antibiotics responsibly, then we're hopefully going to set ourselves on a path that medium and longer term will allow us to buy the time that we'll need to develop new antibiotics. Because again, there simply hasn't been any incentive for pharma industry or biotech to develop new antibiotics. Those new antibiotics that come through the pipelines and make it to the market, for good reason, are being forced to remain reserve antibiotics, which you can barely sell, which makes it a just silly investment proposition. So again, it begs the question: should this be left to the biotech or pharma industry as private enterprise, or is this something that governments or NGOs globally need to address and find novel mechanisms to incentivize the development of novel drugs. There's a lot of talk, there's a lot of ideas. We just need to come through and make those happen.
This is something that you're obviously absolutely passionate about, and I'm absolutely with you. And I hope all the viewers who are seeing this take this away. This is a critically important message. But I'm now going to ask you the investment questions, which is, what should investors be looking out for over the next 6 to 12 months at OpGen?
Again, look, I mean, I think we have stayed the course. There's a lot of exciting near-term catalysts. We have what we believe to be the broadest antimicrobial resistance panel from key pathogens, several dozen AMR markers on a PCR platform in front of the FDA. We had submitted everything the FDA asked us by October. The agency in November came back and told industry that every filing that they have that's not immediately COVID related is paused from a review perspective. We've recently updated the markets that we do anticipate the FDA to start reallocating staff. So we see them hopefully getting back to reviewing those, and should be a near-term FDA clearance decision. We're ready to launch this and make it available across the US very swiftly thereafter. So it's certainly a near-term 2021 catalyst. We also have a number of potential partnering opportunities for our bioinformatics next-gen sequencing platform with Ares Genetics. Again, having gone from a number of collaborative agreements with the likes of QIAGEN, Sandoz, a major undisclosed diagnostics corporate, we have recently opened this up to multiple non-exclusive conversations, because again, one of the ways of getting diagnostics adopted and brought out broadly on a global scale, you need partnerships, you need collaborators. So there's a lot of exciting partnering opportunities. We'll be initiating multiple additional FDA clinical trials this year for complicated urinary tract infection, for invasive joint infections, so think hip and knee replacement surgeries. Again, a little bit forgotten given that a lot of these surgeries got postponed or rescheduled during COVID. We'll be back doing those in the near future. And then, we're also looking at getting approval in China. We've been working with our Chinese partners for a number of years, getting the Univero platform through the Chinese FDA equivalent, the Chinese NMPA. Again, we've submitted everything that the NMPA has asked of us and our partners. It got postponed in 2020 due to COVID. We're certainly optimistic for 2021. That is key from a growth perspective. Once we get Chinese approval, our partner has committed to more than 360 Univero systems and over 1.5 million in Univero cartridges over an 8-year period. So that's potentially north of 150 million in revenue opportunity combined to OpGen. So a lot of exciting catalysts. And again, we've built the infrastructure. We've got the platforms developed. We've gotten the clinical trials successfully completed. We've got strong data. We've gotten regulatory approvals in the US, in Europe, in some Asian countries, waiting for China. And then it's a commercial execution game. And again, we've got the team in place in the US that is commercializing all of our platforms across all of the OpGen portfolio directly. And we've got the partnerships in place, for example, with Menarini across key European markets, 11 countries, where they're our distribution channel partner. So a lot of exciting stuff and a lot of near-term news flow coming up for OpGen.
I'm getting the sense from you that although 2020 must have been difficult for you as it was for everyone, that you're looking forward to 2021 and you're optimistic.
Absolutely. And I've, having been in molecular diagnostics for almost 25 years, both in oncology and now the last 10 years in infectious disease, it's never been more gratifying to be in this space. Our team has stepped up. We've at a local and regional level helped, test thousands of people, tens of thousands of people for COVID. So we've made our little small contribution in this fight. And again, the world starts to appreciate the true value of rapid molecular diagnostics in infectious disease. And that's just an exciting space to be in. So, it's, to me, diagnostics is always instant gratification. You take a patient sample, you run a test, within hours, you've got an actionable result. This is not, a therapeutic that in a small percentage of cases over years gives you some incremental survival benefit. This is truly life and death for an individual there and then with, you know, immediate actionable information.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Oliver. Really appreciated talking to you. And just remember, everyone who's listening, that really important message about antimicrobial stewardship. I think it's one of our great challenges and up there with climate change as something we have to solve. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks, Vivienne. Appreciate it.